drawing that I left for this stage. Details of the face, because I knew I could really pull it together at this stage. Edge of Bob's temple. And also, when you're working with the correction fluid, you can fine-tune some of the lines that were rougher before. So it's a little bit of cleanup I can do at this point. And don't be afraid to use your finger to rub it in or streak it. Edge of a kneecap, edge of this bone. Put white highlights. You see how simple that is. You put a little bead of white at the top of a form and suddenly it looks like a little drop or blob of something. This thumb is a little clunky, so I'm going to go in with this whiteout and refine that a bit. There we go. Looks like it's hanging on by a thread, but that's okay. Working with these correctional pens is a great way too to get wet shapes. In the next drawing, the reason I'm going to do a lake monster is we can touch on some aspects of drawing water. And for drawing water, going in with your white at the very end is really important because it's those reflective surfaces that make things look wet, as you can see here. Edge of the heel. I want to bring out this heel a little bit more. Okay. Stinky Bob. Voila! One stinky Bob. Okay, let's see. Let's tackle, I had promised a lake monster, so let's tackle the lake monster. And I think I'll do this one on watercolor paper. I'm working with a rough surface here. A little bit of a tooth on this paper. And in this case, I'm going to go in with brush and ink. Usually, I only go in with brush and ink after I've done really tight pencils. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to jump in. I'm also going to work with a extra soft crayon or China marker, which I'm going to use for texture at one point. And I will be using the whiteout pen as well. Somewhere here, there's my brush. Okay. And could somebody give me a cup of water? That's the one thing I didn't properly prepare for. Thank you, Catherine. Any questions before I get to the next stage?
How long did it take you to feel comfortable with your tools?
Long time. It was really doing conventions with my friend John Tollivan. John Tollivan worked on the comic book Swamp Thing with me back in the mid-'80s. Thank you. And it was John that would go to a show, set up his tools, and just jump in. And it was sitting next to him and watching him work that got me more confident about just jumping into a drawing and working with it. And you know, John and I were doing some conventions where we'd be at a show for 2-3 days and draw nonstop from the time the doors opened at 10 until sometimes the wee hours of the night, because people would ask for drawings that you didn't have time to do on the floor, so you'd go back and finish them in the hotel room. And that was a steep learning curve, but you definitely get comfortable with your tools after that kind of trial by fire. So, okay, here we go. What I want to do is a piece in which we're going to be looking at an animal that's partially in, partially out of the water, and partially under the water. So, I'm going to go with kind of a classical approach to the lake monster, which is more of the snaky, eely kind of thing. And what I'm doing now is just sort of roughing in the shape of what I want to be doing. And what I'm going to have is a lake monster who is coming up on the beach, so that we can play with forms that are wet, coming out of the water, forms that are under the water, and forms that are just peeking up out of the water. Now, lakes, of course, do not have tides the way that the ocean does. There's usually wave action connected with a lake. But what I'm going to do is have kind of a rocky beach here, a little bit of a broken conifer tree here to frame the picture a little bit, and a large rock in the foreground to frame that off. And I don't want to give him a traditional snaky kind of head. I want to give him a weird kind of cross between a canine head and a serpentine head. So I'm going to play with form here that may or may not work out, but we'll see. Okay. Now, typically I would go in with much tighter pencils, but since we're doing this as a demo, I'm just going to jump in and trust to my ability to save this drawing. Okay, now I don't know how well you can see the pencils on the projector. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay. So what I want to do first is, as I do with the marker drawings, I'm going to begin by delineating the forms that are heaviest in shadow or at the bottom of a form, so that I can go in with a little bit of weight to the line. And as you can see, I'm taking a fair amount more care than I do when I work with the markers, because I got to live with these lines. And also working with the brush, it's a much finer tool and capable of way more subtle line work than I can get with a marker. Markers are dead lines to me, and to me brush line is probably the most alive type of line. Some pens, especially flexible pen nibs, you can get a very lifelike line, but with brushes I can really control the width of the line. It's just got a lot more life to it, whereas a marker is inherently, to my mind, like a dead line. I can't really control the thick and thin when I'm drawing with a marker, because a marker only has one thickness. I can toy with it a little bit by turning the marker a bit on edge or on its side or that sort of thing, but nothing like what I can get with a brush. Now, you may notice that I'm starting to get more of a dry brush look now. That's because the ink that had been loaded into this pen is running out, but I continue drawing because I'm getting very fine line work at this point, and I like drawing with that final line. And then finally, I'm just not getting anything. Yeah, that's not too bad of a face. I don't know if I write home about it, but okay. Now, because he's coming up on a rocky beach, I don't want to go drawing his underbelly, because it's the rocks and the stones on the beach that are going to delineate where his body is resting. So I'm delineating the bottom of his form